September 12, 2021. Episode 16, Smoke Out the Hoard. 26th day of Flame Rule. Weather forecast: warm day, low 80s, humid, raining. Now that we were all officially licensed and had agreed upon a group name, we discussed what was to come next for Page Force. We settled on what felt like the most pressing issue at hand. Or rather, it was in our hands, in the form of a piece of paper that Kyokyojo had retrieved from Ermir Wit, some days ago. We were to set our sights back on the Hark. We met up the following morning. The only instruction the paper had was to ask the sentry guards for leads and information, as intel was ever changing. We made our way to a sentry post. The man working there was Robin Monteg, someone Moose and I were familiar with. Seemingly confident, Moose asked the rest of us to hang back, asserting that she could handle the situation. The rest of us shrugged at one another as Moose approached Robin. What should have been a very simple conversation somehow turned into something vague and off-subject. However, Moose did let Robin know that we were now licensed adventurers with the name Page Force. I think she was hoping to boast to someone, but once she started mentioning a kill count, I quickly intervened. I asked Robin for any information he had concerning the Hark and/or his bandits. Robin told us they had found some clues to indicate that the hub of the bandits' operation may have been located in a hideout behind the Shining Falls. A trip that would easily be a few days' travel. We realized that should we leave Secomber immediately, that we would miss the town wake, planned on what normally was the day of the Midsummer Festival. We didn't want to miss our chance to say a proper goodbye to Kelmorn and the others who died during the attack, so our trip to the Shining Falls was postponed until the day after the funeral. Considering the wake was still a few days out, we were left to spend the remaining time doing other tasks. For me, that meant hitting up the books at the library whenever I wasn't working, and researching the Shining Falls. Unfortunately, a lot of what I found was just landscape description and renderings. There wasn't much to make special note of. I'm not sure what I was hoping to find. I just like to feel prepared. I know that Kairax spent most of her downtime prepping flowers and bouquets for the funeral. She also made it a point to stop at Fogfound Wilderness Supplies to buy 2 water skins for the Shining Falls trip. Svend was up to his normal antics, spending most evenings drunk and at the tavern roughhousing, until who knows what time at night. Although, I did also spot him fishing once or twice from the river on some afternoons while I was making my way through town. I'm not entirely positive that he was awake though. He made sure to brag about his training progress once we all met up again. Kyokyojo had been working on his chess game, and he wasn't the only one. He had Hyapan in full chess mode training too. How interesting would it be to play chess against a wind mouse? Thane was mostly a ghost as usual. I know he loitered around the toy store for at least a little while. Probably entertaining the kids again if I had to guess. Other than that, who knows what else Thane is ever up to? It is probably for the best that we don't. Moose spent her next few days as busy as I had ever seen her. She balanced her time between helping Kairax, her mother, as well as working on a project of her own making, just for Kelmorn. Who could blame her for wanting to stay busy? It must have been a stressful few days for her, preparing to say goodbye to your father. I can't imagine. The end result was truly beautiful though. Moose's memorial piece to her father was a metallic flower that also doubled as a music box and would play a song that Kelmorn would always sing to himself while he worked. When she finally showed it to me, it definitely left me feeling a bit choked up and misty-eyed, so I'm sure Mincy cried when she saw it. The day of the Midsummer Festival, 1496 DR, had arrived, and to be expected, the town was solemnly quiet. Normally, this festival would have been led by the clergy of Lathander, but they stayed in Waterdeep considering the circumstances. The fallen had been relocated to the town square, their bodies placed in open decorated caskets with sheets draped over them. The priest we had originally seen at the Temple of Yondola was also there, still maintaining repose on them. I accompanied Mincy and Moose over to the square. As we approached, Mincy became understandably more rattled, her eyes and nose having stained red. I could hear her shaky voice telling Moose she wouldn't be able to speak. and that if the time were to come, that she would need Moose to do it in her stead. Moose nodded back to her mother, holding onto her arm tightly as we walked. We were greeted by the rest of our party shortly after arriving. There was lots of food and drink being served for the event, very little alcohol though. Most people were meandering and mingling near those tables, as they waited for the service to begin. Finally, after a short time, the man in the black robes carrying a golden set of scales made his way to the front of the crowd. He began his speech by asking us to rejoice, despite the fact that our loved ones had ended their journey unnaturally and early. He spoke of Kelemvor, killer of the god of murder, and told us that death should not be viewed as a dark quest, that it is a natural journey. The priest seemed much less focused on Sven that day as he carried on with his words. Almost as though he was making it a point to not even spare a glance in Sven's direction. Which was made especially strange when Sven decided to be the first amongst the crowd to stand up and speak on behalf of one of our fallen. Sven's speech wasn't especially inspired or anything. In fact, he spoke more about Mincy and her mean right hook, from the day she punched Kyokyojo, than he did of Kelmorn, but I think Moose still appreciated the fact that he broke the ice. She hadn't been ready yet. But even as Sven continued to drag out his speech for her sake, it was made clear to me that Moose was still frozen. And as someone who hadn't known Kelmorn that well, Sven was also in need of some saving, so I stood up next. Despite being initially nervous, I actually found it rather easy to speak of Kelmorn. He was a good, hardworking man. He was very dedicated to his family, and there's just something very admirable about that. You don't always see it in every family. I too will miss him, and I am so sorry Moose and Mincy lost him. I didn't have to say too much before Moose finally worked up the nerve to stand up and speak herself. I think hearing a little more about her father brought out her courage. Mincy cried upon hearing her daughter speak fondly of her dearly departed dad, but she smiled warmly as well. Upon Moose having said her piece, other town members began to make their way to the head of the crowd and speak of their own departed loved ones. This went on for a while before people began to disperse, some talking amongst each other once more. Then finally, after a little while longer, the caskets were loaded up into carts, so that they could be brought back over to the Temple of Yondola, or Warkeen. Our group followed Kelmorn's casket to the Temple of Yondola. While on the way, I heard Sven compliment Moose on her speech. Once we had arrived at the temple, the clergy of Yondola gave a traditional service in Halfling. The cleric of Kelemvor was also there to help lower the caskets into the ground. From there, people were invited to throw dirt over the caskets. When it was Moose's turn, she threw some nuts and bolts along with the dirt into her father's grave. Mincy smiled at Moose and revealed that she had buried Kelmorn with his toolkit. Kairax also threw in a flower crown, a true Page Force memento. Dusk had draped over the town and we all began to head home. I walked with Kairax for a bit, allowing Mincy and Moose some family alone time after what they had just been through. As we walked, I noticed Kairax was holding a flower from the service. One she had people speak kind words into. I asked her what she planned to do with it. She smiled at me gently, and said that once she was back on the farm, she would let the petals fly into the wind. A nice concluding sentiment, for what I felt was such a long week. The next day was the first of Elysia's, 8th month of the year, and it was a hot one. 90 degrees and lots of sun. We all met up at Moose's house that morning. Once Moose came outside, I asked her how Mincy had taken to the news of her leaving for another trip with Page Force. Moose said that her mother seemed to have known it was coming, and so she had accepted it. And that Mincy had also told her that she was going to spend more time at the temple, as she had grown to like it there. I got the sense that the two of them had come to a kind of understanding that I wouldn't be able to grasp, so I let it go. Such is the way of a relationship between mother and daughter, that I know nothing about. We headed to some shops before leaving Secomber, mostly to buy rations and healing potions. Pretty standard stops for us at this point in our adventuring careers. And then we made our way on horseback to Rivergate, or Mygate as they say. The first day of travel, we probably did about 50 miles and we didn't run into any trouble on the road. Apparently bandit raids had lowered greatly, or stopped altogether, according to Thane. And so far, his intel seemed correct. Moose had made herself a mini fan to deal with the heat some time before we all turned in for the night. The second day of Elysia's was much cooler, somewhere in the 70s. It was also very cloudy and windy, like it might rain at any point. The trip was once again peacefully uneventful, and so we livened it up with some conversation. The topic of scars coming up when Moose pointed to one over Kairax's eyebrow and asked for the story behind it. Kairax seemed uneasy at first, mentioning how she didn't like talking about it. Moose was able to change Kairax's mind by pointing out the large scar over her own back. Apparently Moose had almost gotten run down by her own cannon at some point. And then she pointed out two more. One where she had almost lost her hand, and another where she had gotten hit by lightning somewhere over her arm. I chided at Moose for her lack of forethought, and how it often concerns me, but she just sort of waved me off. Kairax then proceeded to tell us the tale of how some mean children lured her into a cave when she was young, under the false pretense that she would get to see an animal, but then they began to throw rocks at her. Thus the eyebrow scar was born, a story that prompted us to want to cheer her up after its retelling. Svend claimed to have an understanding for the betrayal Kairax faced in her youth. He locked eyes with me, and then mentioned having once been scarred by an ice orb that shot him in the back. I've probably said this before, but it bears repeating in moments like this. Svend pisses me off. I've apologized to him numerous times for that incident, and he knows that I didn't mean for that spell to hit him. Why do I feel like he is never going to let it go? Kyokyojo mentioned traveling through a cave, coming across a creature, and then dancing. Apparently that had scarred him in one way or another, but I didn't quite follow what he meant by this. I have a feeling he was being a smart ass. Thane's story was one of real heroics. He spoke of having a nasty scar in his right shoulder from a short sword blade cut he received while rescuing a woman and her brother from bandits on the road. Layla and Samuel had been their names. Apparently his magic had been the real hero, as he had managed to scare off the crooks with a cast of burning hands. My story wasn't so impressive. I looked to the scar on the palm of my hand, and then told them I had tripped over my father while he was sleeping on the floor. He had decided to pass out right behind our door one morning. When I fell, my hand landed on the glass of a broken bottle. The third of Elysia's, it had gotten hot again, and there was not a single cloud in the sky. The day passed with little to no incident, and I think the heat was getting to all of us just a bit. By the 4th of Elysia's, it had cooled up again, with decent cloud cover. Without the scalding sun beating down heavily on our backs, we found the energy to recommence more conversation. This time we had somehow managed to get on the topic of worst dates. I mentioned having gone on what I thought was supposed to have been a date, but I asked if I could bring a friend. In doing that, I unintentionally turned the whole outing into a much larger group setting, and then I couldn't bring myself to say anything the whole time. I felt overshadowed by the crowd. Moose apparently went on a date with a guy to get ice cream one evening, but her ice cream scoop fell onto the ground. And then, she ended the day early, by pushing her date into the river for some reason. I had to shake my head at her story. I don't remember ever hearing about it. Thane didn't bring up any specific date he went on. He just said, he loses interest very quickly once the date becomes about status. He didn't really elaborate much either, but he looked as though the whole concept of it left a bad taste in his mouth. Kyokyojo's face was very reminiscent of Thane's when speaking on the topic. He stated how being part of an influential family had provided him with plenty of opportunities. He then went on to say, "When you don't take interest in people, your father takes it upon himself to arrange dates for you." His distaste and boredom with dating was made abundantly clear with that phrase. And I don't think I blame him for feeling that way. Sven's story was not what I would call a date. He spoke of drinking heavily, claiming that where he was from, it was a requirement to drink fast or the alcohol would freeze. A woman at the bar became angry with him for one reason or another. Unclear on that. Anyways, she gave him a black eye. Her husband then showed up, and Sven bought them both around. Then for some reason, he claimed to have woken up naked, very far away from home, days later. Again, not a date, Sven. That sounds like a bender. Lastly, we all turned towards Kairax, who once again did not wish to share. After some mild moose prodding, she confessed that nobody had ever liked her enough to ask her on a date. This led to Moose, myself and Sven all offering to take her out. Thane also conjured her an array of magical flowers to amaze over. We arrived at Zelbros just as the last bit of sun was still peeking over the horizon, our 4th day of travel having finally come to an end. We took refuge at the halfway inn, whose staff immediately recognized Moose from her generous payment the last time we had been there. As most of us headed up the stairs to get some rest, I couldn't help but notice that Kairax had gone off somewhere. I could understand one's need for a little alone time, especially after being in the constant company of our comrades for the past 4 days, so I let it slip from my mind. We awoke on the 5th of Elysias, to find the weather somewhere in the mid-80s with overcast skies. Another full day's worth of travel later, and we had made it to Loudwater just as the day was ending. Loudwater is known for being a border town between civilization and the wilds. It is also home to the Green Regents, the chosen of Myliki, a goddess known as the Lady of the Forest. Their faithful influence was made abundantly clear throughout the town, as it was very much a half city and half garden. There also happened to be a full temple of Melora there, according to Kairax. Due to 100 years of the garden town being one of Melora's favorite places, so we quickly made our way there on Kairax's behest. The Temple of Melora was a very unique building, as it seemed to be made with no unnatural materials. Moose especially seemed thrown off by this, as she took it all in with a distrusting facial expression. Kairax, however, felt very at home. She approached the altar for prayer, and received a warm welcome from the clergy. Well, all of them except one, who appeared to be a judgmental high elf. After spending some time at the temple, most of us were eager to turn in for the night. We headed to the nearest inn, and for 2 silver per person, we were able to get a decent night's rest. The 6th of Elysias was upon us, along with cool 70-degree weather, and only light cloud cover. We spent the first chunk of our morning asking people around town for the best way to the Shining Falls. We were then told of a trail, easily passable by horse, and so we made our way north as instructed. After traveling for a good part of the day, we began to hear signs of being close. Mere steps later, we were actually able to see the falls in the distance, as the evening greeted us. As we gained ground, I began to describe some of the landscape details I had read so much about before we left Secomber, such as the edge of the falls being 120 feet up, and the distinct horseshoe shape to their formation, as well as some of the mountain peaks we could see beyond in the distance. When nobody seemed particularly interested in my facts, I went back to being quiet, but then I thought I could hear something quite unlike water falling. No, it sounded more like voices whispering. I glanced around at my surrounding party members. None of them were whispering. The only other person who maybe looked somewhat aware of the sounds was Kyokyojo, based on how his eyes darted around. Everybody else seemed more focused on the view ahead, and so I asked them all to please stop walking. Moose, Thane, and Kyokyojo listened. Sven, however, did not. And because of this, Kairax continued walking with him, out of a need to keep him safe. The rest of us halted in our tracks and watched, as the 2 of them made their way up the path, just a small ways ahead. Sven first, Kairax just a step behind. My eyes grew wide, as I could swear the voices I had been hearing had suddenly gone quiet. And then, like a knee-jerk reaction, I could hear my own voice yelling out, but it was already too late. 5 fishman-like creatures that had been hiding in the bank of the river leaped out onto the trail, and one of them was already attacking Sven. These creatures were not to be trifled with. They were well equipped with clamping spears, capable of holding one hostage, a nasty set of teeth for biting, and crafty spells, such as Sacred Flame and Bane. They were quick to use all of these tricks against us too. One of them casted Bane on both Sven and Kyokyojo, and another grappled Thane with its spear. Luckily, Moose was able to hit the concentrating fishman with a bolt from her crossbow, the sudden injury causing it to lose its grip over the spell it had casted on our friends. Svend then made the risky move of trying to free Thane by breaking the spear holding him hostage, taking a hit from another fishman in the process. Unfortunately, all he managed to accomplish was breaking the handle off, which actually made the mechanism stuck, so it was now harder for Thane to escape. Thane shot Svend a not-so-thrilled glance, before turning his sights back onto the creature who had trapped him. He set the fishman ablaze with burning hands for committing such a deed. After witnessing the exchange between Thane and Svend, an idea occurred to me. I casted the enlarge spell over the mechanism, still holding our beguiling friend captive, and he was finally able to slip free. Kairax, deeply angered by the ambush of these oily creatures, called upon the full power of a wrathful and divine smite. The devastating blow from her sword, instantly bloodying one of the fishmen who had attacked Svend. Assuming Kairax to be a major threat, after such a display of power, another one of the creatures grappled her with its spear. We all attempted to help her, as the lot of the fishmen seemed to want to gang up on our paladin, but much to everyone's horror, Kairax fell unconscious. In a rage, Thane sliced the one that had taken Kairax down in half, while Svend was quick to pour a potion into her mouth. He too then turned around and landed a devastating blow on one of the remaining fishmen. Kyokyojo was then able to finish the job with a well-timed magic missile. In the end, we were able to come out on top, and kill all of these creatures that had ambushed us, despite their strange weapons and clever tactics. Not without being a little worse for wear though. We all took a moment to catch our breath. I made it a point to catch Sven's eye, so that he would notice. "Next time I tell you to stop, won't you please listen?" I implored. He leaned in a little towards me, and with a true Svend-like grin he responded with a simple, "No." End of chapter. Notes that Siluca doesn't or wouldn't know what Thane spent his few days doing, other than going to the toy store leading up to the day of the funeral. He conducted some street hustling, and tried to figure out where some of the missing stuff in town was going. Kairax confided in a local skunk. The night Page Force stayed in Zelbros.